Beyond the Mic with Sean Dillon.
We're joined on the Starline by a lawyer, writer, and amateur painter. We add author to her resume as she's now released her debut novel, which was almost called Memento Mori. Look for it in bookstores as What Meets the Eye. We welcome author Alex Kenna.
Thank you for having me.
Alex, let's go beyond the mic. Lawyer during the day, mom, painter at night. What was the origin of What Meets the Eye?
I had took a little break from painting when I was starting to think about having my kid, and then was just looking for another creative outlet. When the pandemic hit, I was at home working telecommute a lot of the time. I got pregnant. I couldn't really go out much, got totally stir crazy. And writing just kind of became an outlet, a way to keep my brain from atrophying.
Now, as a prosecutor, you have the story you want to tell a jury. You set it up in your opening argument, bring witnesses to give evidence and support it, and then wrap it all up with a strong closing statement. How did this practice help with writing this novel?
I think it helped a lot because trial law is a lot about telling a story. You have to keep a jury's interests. You have to find the best way to present evidence. You have to explain why something matters. And I think it's also, the nerves that kind of come with having to present a case. I think there's definitely a parallel to the nerves with putting your work out there and, getting judged, and, maybe some people will think you're not worthy, not like it. So I think some of the skills that definitely transferred.
What makes the art world thrilling and yet sketchy at the same time?
Well, if you love art, it's always interesting. And the huge swings in prices, the glamour that comes with it, the scandals. I think every time that you have something in the arts with crazy personalities and beautiful things to look at, there's definitely an interest. But there's definitely a sketchy side of things with just the amount of money. Every time there's a huge amount of money at play, there's always a dark side. And I worked in a gallery for a few months, which is one of the things that kind of inspired this book right when the Great Recession hit. So I got to see the dark side in that people don't always act their best when suddenly you've gone from an upswing to a downswing, which I saw happen pretty much live. That was definitely a sketchier experience.
What was the most expensive piece you ever sold as an art salesperson?
It probably would have, I want to say it would have been low six figures, but it's been like 15 years. So there are definitely a couple like very expensive pieces that I almost sold where, you're working on commission and, you think, oh my God, this is gonna be my month. And then all of a sudden the person's like, maybe
I don't think so. Are you a Banksy fan?
Oh yeah.
Do you consider art because he uses stencils, or is that just a form that's acceptable for you?
Definitely. No, I'm not any kind of purist. I think if it's good, if it's powerful, if it has something to say, then it's definitely art.
Your main character, Kate, has a challenging relationship with her daughter, especially because of her ex. How has your own relationship with your son influenced the way you wrote Kate and the love she has for Amelia?
That was an interesting process because I didn't have a kid when I first wrote the book, and then you have a kid, and then it definitely changes things. So going back in subsequent drafts, I definitely made certain changes. Like, you realize that when you have a kid, you're staring at cute pictures of the kid on your phone all day, and you're thinking about the kid. And I definitely, when I first wrote the book, it came off like a person with no children writing about somebody who had a kid. And that was something that I kind of had to go back. And I also made a couple adjustments because I hadn't been around a lot of 7-year-olds. And luckily I have a brilliant editor who has older children. And she was giving me all kinds of notes like 7-year-olds know how to brush their teeth. I'm like, okay, now I know, going back and changing that.
It's time for the Rocky and 8. Alex has been worried about it. It's just 8 random questions. Answer with the first thing that comes to your mind. Alex, there is no pressure.
Okay.
Best place to take your dog Zelda for a walk in LA?
Eden Canyon.
Why?
It's a low elevation hike, not too many dogs around, and beautiful views.
Is there one thing you miss from Washington, D.C.?
Not having to drive everywhere.
Alex, should artists be held to the same moral standards as the rest of the world?
As a person, yes, but it doesn't mean that you have to stop looking at their work when you find out that they're an a-hole.
Did we really need the Sex and the City revival?
I don't think we needed any of the Sex and the Cities.
Why?
Well, I like to think that women are a little more multidimensional than their, Saturday night activities, but it had its point and its place in time.
Now, you like shopping flea markets with your husband. What is your best flea market find?
Oof. Well, my husband would say our best near flea market find was an antique toilet that he wanted to buy for our house as a chair, but I nixed that one. So
no, you aren't bringing that home.
I'd probably say I got a couple antique lamps that we've got in our living room, a couple pieces of vintage jewelry.
What was the wildest thing you did before marriage?
Oof. I spent a summer in Germany. Definitely had a good time. I'll just leave it at that.
You started as a visual artist doing figure drawing during your teens. However, I want to know, what body part was the hardest for you to draw?
Probably hands. I think hands are notorious. I think everybody when they first start drawing, they want to draw the face, and the face is fun, the face is exciting, and then there's the moment of like, oh, it's connected to this thing. Yeah, just hands are probably the biggest challenge, and it's supposed to be the sign of whether somebody actually knows what they're doing is if they can render hands.
I know, hands. It's just kind of weird. Where's the best place on the Penn campus?
Oof. Best place on the Penn campus. Fine Arts Library.
Why?
It's beautiful. It's this crazy 19th century building that's full of books about artists from all over the place. And, I have fond memories of being, 18 and staring at, bohemian boys and pretending to look at books. So I definitely have a soft spot in my heart.
It's time for the back half with Alex Kenna, author of What Meets the Eye Beyond the Mic. Alex, before law school, you studied painting and art history. Why are these topics similar and yet very different?
There's a very different way, I think, of thinking about art from an art perspective and from an art history perspective. And I think art historians don't necessarily think about how art's made from like a visual perspective. And I think sometimes things are missed. When you're an artist, you kind of think about how something was put together, what this person was looking at. You notice little, I don't want to say flaws because you're not judging the masters, but nobody's perfect, even the people in museums. And then, art history, you want to put everything in context. How does this relate to, was there a war going on? What was the political scheme? Whereas as an artist, you're just like, oh, that orange is amazing.
As an artist, what's your favorite color that you absolutely overuse?
Probably turquoise. Turquoise, green. Yeah, I like the bright colors.
You have experienced the art world, but you didn't love it enough to stay there. Instead of, you fell in love with the law. How has the art world helped and hurt you?
I think there is definitely a parallel universe where I could have stayed in the art world. I think it's a really hard universe to break into, especially, I was a middle-class girl with no connections, and I graduated at a horrible time, like 2008, where, nobody was getting a job. And, I painted elephant seals for my thesis, which is not really the best thing to be telling prospective employers. I'm like, hello, you should hire me. I may not have any transferable skills, but I promise I'm a hard worker. But, there's a parallel universe if I'd had a rich uncle who was on the board of the Getty and wanted to, hire me for something in the arts where, things might have gone differently. The art world, it affects how I think. It affects how I see, literature too, just because you kind of learn how to make something and you learn how to think creatively, and that applies across different disciplines. So that's definitely affected me as a writer. If in terms of professionally, I can't say it's helped me the most, but we all live and learn.
Now, in which way did the first draft of What Meets the Eye to the final episode, what changed the most?
Well, I think from the first couple chapters, my main character, Kate, was a male police officer.
Really?
So that was a pretty big difference. Other than that, I think I had a lot less of Margot, my victim. I had maybe one chapter from her perspective. And then as I kind of went along, I thought that she needed more of a voice. And, I liked that she was a bit of a jerk and wanted to kind of explore things from her perspective a little bit more. Although, I kind of wrote her as a borderline psychopath, and all my friends are like, when I read her, I think of you. So I don't know what that says.
Alex, you talk about voice. You spend the book not from one point of view, but bouncing between several points, which is unusual. Why was that important for your story?
I think part of it was that I wanted to give a voice to the artists. And I think one of the things that I was interested in exploring is back, I guess, from Margot was influenced by a lot of artists who kind of blended art and life. And I was interested in having an element in my book that kind of added crime to the mix. We're having art projects that kind of blended art and real life and also some criminal activities. And I don't want to go into too much detail because of spoilers, but in order to do that, I kind of needed to show how she was thinking and what perspective that she was coming from. And then there's another artist who has kind of a smaller role in the book, but I also wanted to have at least one chapter from his perspective because I thought I kind of owed it to him because I sort of put him through the ringer so he could at least have a little bit of a voice. And, I think you asked me earlier about how law affects my writing. And, as a trial attorney, you think a lot about presenting evidence, avoiding hearsay, making things as direct as possible. And to me, I think it's a little bit more dynamic in writing when you have a story where you have things happening live, especially in a murder mystery, as opposed to when everything is done after the fact. And obviously there's some of that because there's a sleuth and everything. But when every chapter is just interviews, I think sometimes that can lag a bit. Obviously I've read other books where people do that the whole time and I'm on the edge of my seat.
As a prosecutor, your job is to bring the evil in our society to justice. In a world of black and white, there's a million shades of gray. I want to know who influenced your ideals of right and wrong.
My parents, I think, both have had very strong ideals of right and wrong. I think it was just something that was definitely something that I grew up on with my grandparents as well. My grandfather was a doctor, a very fine man, and he had definitely very strong ideas about helping people in public service. He worked for the VA for his career. So I think probably they were all pretty major factors.
How have they evolved through the years?
I think, if anything, probably you become more compassionate because you see the people who are having a hard time. You see people who this is not the easiest point in their life that people are going through. I think you also developed a sense of perspective. I think I will say, if somebody cuts me off, I'm much less. It doesn't probably bother me as much because your perspective is like, well, you're a bad driver. Oh, pulling into that spot. That's annoying. But in the scheme of things, it's not the worst.
The book is What Meets the Eye. Alex Kenna joins us beyond the mic. Alex, growing up, who mentored and influenced you the most, other than family?
I'm thinking about that. And I think it would be hard to kind of say outside of family. I think my parents were a big influence. My grandparents were a big influence. I had some great teachers, but I do think it probably was mostly family members growing up.
Which writer influenced you from your youth to today? Who helped develop what your voice is now?
I think probably the one who had affected me most was Tana French. I think partly just because I had started out as a painter. For some reason, I never read mysteries. I binge watched mystery shows and I read true crime. And my brain just never made the extremely small leap to go, oh, maybe you should pick up genre books. And then one day it sort of clicked and I thought, wow, maybe I should try this. But I wanted to start reading a lot before I attempted it. And she writes really beautifully and she was really good at certain things that I wanted to get better at. So I think the one thing I kind of learned from my art background is if you want to, when you want to learn how to do something, you have to look at people and you have to really analyze what they do well. So she was the writer where I sort of binge read her books and tried to analyze, sometimes on a micro level, just what is she doing in the scene that's working so well? How is she building tension so well? How is she stage crafting these dialogue scenes where you can just see the characters almost like they're in front of you. So, there are other writers who I've read and who've completely blown me away. But I think just because when I came across her, I was, in that earlier stage of developing as a writer, that she probably affected me the most.
You said earlier you switched Kate from a male to a female perspective. Who are you closer to in private, Kate or Margot?
I think in different ways, I have some things in connection with them. I think as a person, I'd like to think with a moral compass. I'd say that I'm closer to Kate. I think she has a personality structure wise. I'm closer to Kate, and she's got certain insecurities. She's a little bit of an introvert. She's got flaming ADHD. All traits I share. Margot, I think Margot. There's one girl who I had in my art class who was. We used to call her the troll because she was so evil, especially in critiques. So that inspired it a little bit. I sort of thought a little bit about her in terms of personality structure, but the way Margot thinks about art, I think, and I guess a little bit her sense of humor, that I feel like I probably put some of myself into it. And I sort of, when I was thinking of her art projects, obviously I'm not a professional painter. I'm good as a hobbyist. I'm, not an art genius by any stretch of the imagination, but it was fun because I could have a little bit of a fantasy element. I could think, oh, well, let's pretend that I can draw like the masters. What would I do? What projects would I work on? So I think in some of the artists who she liked, I think the reason I could bring them up and they were kind of the tip of my tongue is because I liked them. The reason, other than one or two where I maybe disagreed with Margot, but that's neither here nor there. So, but I think artistically, in terms of how she thought about things, I think that I had in common with her.
Sometimes the past haunts us. Did your art critique classes from the past find their way into this book? I mean, did the darkness of the past visit this book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I want to I should say the vast majority of art teachers I had were, wonderful people who totally shaped me. There's occasional others. Like, I think, I had one class that I ended up dropping where the professor had this weird thing with clowns, and he made us listen to this music that was a cross between Barnum and Bailey's and porn music, and he did make us draw a model with a clown mask. There was a weird clown thing going on. So that initially that was in the book a lot more, and my husband was like, "This is weird. No one wants to read it," so I toned it down. But
no clowns. Yeah. Get that clown out of my head. Yeah, the clown was
semi-inspired by a real person, and I had another teacher. I think there's a scene in that same scene. At one point, the teacher takes someone's straw and uses it as a pointer and dumps it in the turpentine. That happened to me. It was one particular teacher who was not the kindest, unlike, again, the vast majority of my art teachers. And she, at one point, that person, used my straw as a pointer. And I thought that was entirely unnecessary, but, and critiques, sometimes you get really helpful advice, and I think it's actually been really, really good training for, when you look at reviews, but sometimes it does turn into just an evisceration fest of let's all opine about, how everybody else's work is terrible. So, I wanted to bring a little bit of that into the book because it was a memorable experience.
How has writing this novel changed the way that you look at yourself?
I think I never really thought of myself as a fiction writer. I had written before. I did freelance writing, a lot of art reviews, movie reviews. Well, I guess one or two movie reviews, but mostly art reviews beforehand. So, I'd written from that perspective, but fiction was never something I tried before. I never thought about sitting down and trying to construct a plot. So that was exciting because I sort of tried it and I realized that it was something that I could do.
If you're enjoying these conversations, please check out another Beyond the Mic episode to find more actors, artists, and people you need to know. We'd also appreciate a like and subscribe on the Good Pods app. The book is What Meets the Eye. Alex Kenna joins us Beyond the Mic. Alex, what's your favorite book on that shelf behind you?
I have to be honest, these are my husband's books. So these ones are his. I married a huge book nerd, which is probably not surprising, but it's like a pathological level. We moved to LA and he brought 36 boxes of books with him. And that was in our mid-20s, and it's gotten worse from there. And obviously I buy books too. So between the two of us, our house is starting to get super weird, but these particular books behind me are his.
Well, so as he's a book nerd, how hard was it giving him the first draft for him to read and tear apart?
He's actually a huge part, I have to say. And I wrote another book before this. It's not published. It was a political thriller about elections. And we'll just say that my timing couldn't conceivably have been worse. So I put that back on the shelf. But that one, that was my first kind of experiment with trying to write. So I would kind of show it to him chapter by chapter. Because he's such a big reader, he's somebody whose opinion I really trust. So yeah, the poor man has read so many drafts of this book. I had to throw him into my dedication because it is, well more than I had any right to expect.
So what's the best thing about your husband?
He's super, super smart, and he's super, super, just selfless. He helps me carve out time to do this. He takes care of the baby. I've definitely been very lucky in that department.
Alex, what are you still working on as a writer?
Putting the finishing touches on a sequel. It's a very different book. I think I'm almost done with the non-editing part, and then I have to go back and correct the 100,000 typos that and I still have a homophone. I'm like the second grader who mixes up there and there, except I'm a 37-year-old lawyer, so it's really embarrassing. That's going to be next on that stage.
Okay, Alex, spill it. Will we see Kate and Luke in a follow-up story? I
don't know. We'll have to see.
Ooh, secrets from Alex Kenna. How would you describe your own art to someone?
Well, I'm really into paint handling, like thick paint, kind of impasto and bright colors. But a lot of weird stuff. I went through a dinosaur skull phase in Technicolors. My husband brought a couple into work. Not really sure how that looks in the office setting, but he likes them. So then I have some abstract paintings. It's definitely kind of all over the place.
Now, you have so many stories you've been a part of. You've seen so many things that you probably can't even tell us. What's the best and worst thing being a prosecutor?
I think as a prosecutor, I think that going to work and knowing that you can do the right thing, knowing that you're fighting for justice, I think that's definitely a great thing to have and puts us in a privileged position. And then I guess just the downside is there's a term of vicarious trauma. I think you can see a lot of sad things, and if you wouldn't be a person if it didn't affect you. I think that's definitely a downside, but it comes with the job.
Well, what about being an author?
As an author, the best part is getting to write the book and then put it out in the world. And then, I guess the worst part is just, realities of publishing. It's a saturated market. It's a tough place to break into, and you have to deal with just the whims of luck and timing.
Now, rejection is hard. First rejection, judge says no to you, publisher says no to you. How has your first rejection as an author and a prosecutor changed you?
I think, just having graduated in the Great Recession was a great primer for rejection. So, that's kind of that's one good thing that came out of that phase in my life, sitting in my parents' house and sending out cover letter after cover letter, and then sitting at my grandparents' house, which really got desperate, and sending out cover letter after cover letter. So I guess luckily I got used to rejection fairly early in life. It is, I think I try to kind of think of it, especially with the book, is as a numbers game where you apply to a million different agents. You can't really think of it like, oh my God, Agent Bob is my sole agent and they represent all these authors who I worship. It's not healthy. So I just try to, keep a positive attitude and think, okay, well, I'm going to get a million rejections and I only need one yes.
What's one thing people would be surprised to know about you?
Oof. Surprised to know about me. I'm pathologically shy. But I think at this point in my life, I've gotten pretty good at hiding it. So, because I've picked a couple different professional areas where I have to talk a lot, but I guess that's probably something that's not readily apparent.
How did your husband and you meet?
We met in law school. I was really good friends with his roommate, and we were basically her chemistry experiment.
Really?
Yeah. Well, she was very devious, actually. She would, she kept telling me that, he had a crush on me and he would talk about me. And she kept telling, him, oh, how I had such a crush on him and yada, yada, yada. And it was all BS. She was just making it up. I think you get really bored and you start getting a little crazy by the end of the semester in law school. And I think she was looking for some entertainment.
Alex, what's justice to you?
Justice is it's doing the right thing, whatever that might be. And I think it's nuanced and situation dependent.
How has Kate changed the way you look at yourself and the world?
I think she was someone who I don't know if it's necessarily something where it changed the way I looked at myself, but I was interested in exploring with her the idea of somebody whose their whole sense of identity was kind of fallen apart and ripped away, and they had to kind of refigure out who they were. And that, I think, was in part probably working out certain issues, because when I was writing her, I had basically gone from, I had one job that I loved and I was around brilliant, dynamic people who were hilarious all the time. And then suddenly, there was a pandemic. I had gestational diabetes and stayed at home all the time. I had no one to talk to, and I definitely, at that point in my life, felt like this aspect of my identity was kind of gone. And so that was just, in some ways she was a way to kind of explore some of those themes, even though the things that happened to her were way, way worse than anything that happened to me. And she obviously had a very different background, but I don't know if she necessarily changed the way I think about myself, but I did feel a little bit of a kinship with her in that way.
It's time for One Big Question with author Alex Kenna, her book, What Meets the Eye, Beyond the Mic. Alex, if you could have 5 questions with any artist, who would it be? And will be your first question?
Wow. You know what? I don't think I would want to ask questions. I would just want their paintings.
Really?
Honestly, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I would come up with something, but honestly, I think I would trade the questions for a painting, even a little one.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. I have a terrible website that I made myself, alexkenna.com. But Twitter is probably where I'm the most active.
She has troubled drawing hands, kept her husband from buying an antique toilet, and was set up by a devious friend. What Meets the Eye is her book, and it's available at bookstores or online. We thank author Alex Kenna for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that, my friends, is Beyond the Mic.